Good evening and welcome to World Watch. I'm glad you're here because what has happened in the last few hours is one of the most consequential single days of this entire conflict, and most of the coverage you're seeing right now is focused on the flames, the footage, the sirens. What it is not focused on is the number behind all of it, the number that tells you what this war is actually costing, not just in lives but in money, in infrastructure, in the economic stability of an entire region that powers the global economy. We are talking about a damage figure that analysts are now estimating could cross 1 billion in a single day's exchange of strikes, and that number does not include the interceptors. It does not include the military hardware. It does not include what is happening to global oil markets in real time as you watch this. So tonight, we are going to do what this broadcast always does. We are going to go beyond the footage and into the numbers, beyond the press conferences and into the facts. And by the time this segment ends, you will understand not just what happened today, but why it matters for every person watching, no matter where in the world they are sitting right now. Let's get into it. Today is day 27 of the 2026 Iran war, and today was not a quiet day. Israel launched what the IDF described as a, quote, wave of extensive strikes targeting infrastructure in Isfahan, one of Iran's central industrial cities. At the same time, Israel confirmed the killing of Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the man described by analysts as the architect of Iran's near-total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, killed in an overnight Israeli operation. Iran's response was immediate. Tehran fired 2 separate rounds of missiles at central Israel. Air raid sirens sounded across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Rescue crews were deployed to the location of at least one confirmed strike in the center of the country. In Kfar Qasim, an Arab-Israeli city east of Tel Aviv, residents surveyed fresh damage from projectile impacts just hours ago. And simultaneously, Iran continued its campaign against Gulf energy infrastructure. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE all reported Iranian missile and drone activity targeting energy sites. This is not new. But the scale today pushed damage estimates into territory that is now prompting emergency economic assessments from multiple governments. Here is where the $1 billion figure comes from and why it is, if anything, conservative. Let us go through the categories of damage that analysts are now totaling. Israel's Haifa oil refinery. Yesterday, an Iranian missile strike damaged what the Bazan Group owner of the Haifa refinery described as essential infrastructure. The refinery's electrical systems were damaged. Third-party infrastructure outside the complex was hit. The company filed a statement directly at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Most production facilities are operational, but parts of the refinery are being restarted, meaning lost output, lost revenue, and repair costs that are still being assessed. Iran's ports 16 ships destroyed. An American-Israeli strike on 2 Iranian ports on the Persian Gulf, Bandar Lenge and Bandar Kangan, resulted in what Iran's local governor described as extensive destruction. 16 commercial and civilian cargo ships were set on fire. The governor said these vessels, quote, played an important role in the livelihood of sailors and local residents. 16 ships gone in a single strike. Gulf energy infrastructure. Since Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field last week, Iran has systematically targeted energy infrastructure across 4 Gulf states. Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city, the processing hub through which all of Qatar's LNG exports move, sustained what Qatar Energy called extensive damage. Qatar suspended LNG production. That suspension alone sends ripple effects through European energy markets because Qatar supplies approximately 1/5 of global LNG. Aviation 4,000 flights per day canceled. Airspace closures across Bahrain, Iraq, Israel, Kuwait, Qatar, Syria, and the UAE have led to over 4,000 daily flight cancellations. Emirates, Etihad, Qatar Airways all suspended operations. International carriers including British Airways, Lufthansa, Air India, Cathay Pacific, and Wizz Air suspended Middle East services. The losses to the aviation sector alone are described as running into the billions, not millions, billions. Dubai International Airport and Abu Dhabi both sustained direct damage from Iranian strikes. Planes in Kuwait were grounded after airport hits. Hundreds of thousands of passengers stranded. When you add up the refinery damage in Israel, the 16 ships destroyed in Iran's ports, the Gulf energy infrastructure, the aviation disruption, and the ongoing military interceptor expenditure, the $1 billion damage estimate for a single day's exchange is not a dramatic figure. It may be a conservative one. Here's the part of this story that does not stay in the Middle East. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, has described what is happening right now as the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Not the greatest in recent years, not the greatest since Ukraine in history. Oil prices have risen more than 60% since this war began on February 28th. Brent crude is trading above $100 a barrel. At its peak this week, it touched $115. Every dollar increase in the price of a barrel of oil translates directly into higher fuel prices at petrol stations from Lahore to London to Los Angeles. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 1/5 of all global oil supply transits every single day, remains functionally blocked. Iran has imposed what amounts to a near-total blockade. Iranian state-affiliated media reported just today that Iran's parliament is planning to formalize fees for ships attempting to pass through Hormuz, turning the world's most critical maritime choke point into a toll road controlled by a country at war. The Philippines has already declared a national energy emergency, the first country to do so since this conflict began. Global stock markets have reacted. The Dow Jones fell over 400 points on the war's opening days. European and Asian indexes fell 1 to 2%. South Korean markets dropped 2.8% in a single session. Airline stocks like United Airlines dropped 6%. And this is before accounting for the food security dimension. Iran imports 30% of its wheat. 9 grain ships were stuck outside the Strait of Hormuz by early March, unable to enter. Iran's grain imports move through the same ports being struck. The combination of destroyed port infrastructure and a closed Strait of Hormuz is not just an energy crisis, it is the early architecture of a food access crisis for a country of 90 million people. Let us talk about the government-level costs, because these numbers are now formally on the record. The Pentagon burned through $5.6 billion in munitions in just the first 2 days of Operation Epic Fury. That is $5.6 billion in the first 48 hours. As of March 19th, Day 19 of the conflict, the total U.S. military cost was estimated at $18 billion. The Pentagon has now formally requested an additional $200 billion in supplemental war funding from Congress, $200 billion, for a war that Trump's administration described at the outset as a focused operation that would achieve its objectives in, and this is a direct quote, 4 weeks or less. On the Israeli side, the interceptor cost alone has been staggering. Arrow interceptors cost $2 to $3 million each. David's sling runs approximately $1 million per missile. An Israeli air defense doctrine requires firing multiple interceptors per incoming threat. During the heaviest exchange days, Israel was expending hundreds of interceptors in a single barrage at costs running into the hundreds of millions per engagement. Israel's entire annual defense budget is approximately $24 billion. The daily cost of this war on the defensive side alone is testing the outer limits of what that budget can absorb without American financial support at a scale that requires congressional authorization. And Iran? Iran's economy was already contracting under sanctions before a single bomb fell on February 28th. Inflation was running above 40% in 2025. The rial was in freefall. The war has added infrastructure damage, port destruction, and further economic isolation to an economy already under enormous pressure. This is not a war that any participant can afford to fight indefinitely, and the damage bill growing by billions every day is the clearest possible proof of that. We cannot cover today's developments without addressing what happened at Natanz. Iran confirmed today that its Natanz uranium enrichment complex was struck. The semi-official Tasnim news agency reported the strike and said, quote, "No radioactive leak has been reported, and there is no danger to residents living near the facility." The IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, confirmed it had been informed of the strike and stated it was looking into the report. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi issued a statement calling for, quote, "military restraint to avoid any risk of a nuclear accident." Separately, the IAEA Director General expressed deep concern over strikes reportedly near Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. He warned that any damage to Bushehr, an operating nuclear reactor with a large amount of nuclear material on site, could cause a, and this is his direct language, major radiological accident affecting a large area in Iran and beyond. Beyond Iran. The IAEA is telling the world that strikes near Bushehr carry the risk of a radiological event that crosses borders. That is not a theoretical warning. That is the head of the UN's nuclear agency publicly stating that this war has reached a threshold where a mistake, not even an intentional decision, a mistake could trigger consequences that no government is prepared to manage. That dimension of this conflict, the proximity of sustained strikes to operating nuclear infrastructure, is receiving a fraction of the coverage it deserves. Day 27. And here is where we stand. At least 1,937 people killed in Iran by U.S.-Israeli strikes, according to Iran's health ministry. More than 24,800 injured. At least 19 Israelis killed and more than 5,229 wounded by Iranian missile attacks. More than 1,000 dead in Lebanon, and over 1 million displaced by Israeli ground operations and airstrikes there. 13 U.S. service members killed. Over 9,000 U.S. strikes conducted since February 28th, according to CENTCOM figures. 130 vessels destroyed. 16 cargo ships burned in a single port strike today. The Strait of Hormuz carrying 1/5 of global oil functionally blocked, with Iran now planning to charge ships for passage. Qatar's LNG offline, 4,000 flights canceled daily, oil above $100, the IEA calling it the greatest energy security crisis in history, the IAEA warning about radiological risk near active nuclear sites. And the damage bill, the real damage bill, not just the military hardware, but the ports, the refineries, the airports, the ships, the energy infrastructure, the aviation disruption, the financial market volatility, is now being estimated in figures that approach and exceed $1 billion per day of active exchange. $1 billion a day. In a war now entering its 27th day, that is the number behind the flames and the sirens and the press conferences. That is the number nobody is putting on screen in large enough text. And it is compounding. Every single day. This has been World Watch. We will continue tracking every development as this conflict evolves. Stay informed, and we will see you next time.